Welcome to Learn MVC Core tutorial step by step in 4 hours. So in this 4 hours, we will go and we will try to understand what are the different concepts of MVC Core and how to go about creating a simple project using MVC Core. In order to understand MVC Core, it is very essential to understand what is this thing called as .NET Core. Now, before I start with what is .NET Core and creating a simple project around it, let us first try to understand the different vocabularies for .NET. So we have one thing called as .NET Framework and one thing called as .NET Core. This .NET Framework is our old friend who has been right from 2002, for past 15 years. So it has those various versions like .NET 1, .NET 2.0, 3.0, 3.5, and now probably 4.6 or something, right? So that is .NET Framework. So the old thing what we have been using till now is .NET Framework, and .NET Framework only runs on Windows platform, right? So whenever I use the word .NET Framework, I mean to say the Windows .NET Framework, while this .NET Core is nothing but it is .NET Framework which can run cross-platform. So it can run on Mac, it can run on Linux, and it can run on Windows. So if you go to this .NET Core main website, it says that .NET Core helps you to create web applications which can run on Windows, Linux, and Mac. So in other words, .NET Framework is for Windows and .NET Core is to run cross-platform. So in other words, on .NET Core we have MVC Core, and on .NET Framework we have MVC 5 or 4 or 3 or 2, right? So if you want to learn the .NET Framework and MVC 5, then I would suggest to go and start with this series here, learn MVC 5 in 2 days, where I've explained what is MVC, right? But if you're talking about MVC Core, then this is the tutorial for it. So remember, there are two flavors. One is the Windows platform thing, the old one, strong one, trusted one. Other one is the new one, with the modular approach, cross-platform, right? So this tutorial is all about MVC Core. So in case if you are interested in the .NET Framework MVC 5, then I would suggest to go and watch this video series, and this one is for MVC Core. So the first thing, if I want to go and develop anything on .NET Core, right, I need to first get the SDK. Okay, so the SDK, you can see here the .NET Core SDK. So you have SDK for Windows, you have SDK for Mac, you have SDK for Linux. So depending on which platform you want to develop, you have to go and download these SDKs. Now, before we go into .NET Core, we create a project and we show some demos. Let us try to understand the architecture difference between .NET Core and our old .NET Framework. So first thing is, it's either .NET Framework, it's either .NET Core or any .NET. It has basically 3 sections. The first one is the CLR. So in the CLR, we have garbage collector, we have the JIT, we have the compilers, we have the CTS, the CLS, and all those basic things, which makes a .NET application run. And then we have the base class libraries, which has systems collection, which has systems of data, other utilities kinds of classes. And on the top of it, Microsoft has developed MVC and then WPF and WinForms and so on. So in the same way, in .NET Core as well, we have those 3 sections. We have different naming convention here. So the CLR here is termed as the Core CLR, and the BCL here is termed as the Core FX. And on the top of this core, we have MVC Core. So we have .NET Framework on which we have MVC, and then we have .NET Core on which we have MVC Core. Now the other big difference is in terms of the installation in both of these frameworks. In .NET Framework, you get one big installation, whatever .NET 2.0, 4.0, whatever it is. You go ahead, you do a next, it installs it, and it installs it per computer. So basically there is a central cache like global assembly cache, or somewhere in program files, all the installations of .NET Framework per version, per computer is done, and all the applications use that version. While in .NET Core, the installation is per application. So every application has its own folder. So in that folder, depending on what you want from Core CLR and from BCL or from MVC Core, you can go ahead and you can use NuGet. NuGet is the package manager. NuGet helps you to get the required components required components of your .NET DLLs in your folder. So you can go and say, okay, I just want core CLR, I just want BCL, and from that I want system collection. So here in .NET Core, the installation of the framework happens via NuGet. Complete installation happens via NuGet, while here it happens via a full setup, and that full setup is installed per computer. So this is per computer and this is per application. In case you are new to NuGet, I would suggest to go and watch the NuGet video what we have in the .NET Q&A section, where we have explained what is NuGet. But for now, just to make it simple, NuGet is nothing but it is a package manager which helps you to download .NET components in your computer, and it helps you to get the latest .NET components in your computer. So now that we understand the architecture, now that we know what is .NET Core, so let us go ahead and install this .NET Core SDK. You can see that in this .NET Core SDK, depending on you want to do development in Mac, or you want to do development in Windows, you want to do development in Linux, you can install the appropriate setup, right? So let me go ahead and create a simple hello world, and let us see how it looks like. And what I will do in this hello world creation is I will not use any kind of tool, means I will be doing it manually. Now this manual creation I am doing for the first time, just to make you understand that how .NET Core looks like internally, right? Because if you understand the internal concept, then by using a tool it is very easy, right? So I will not be using Visual Studio, I will not be using VS Code, anything but a simple command prompt. So the first thing is you need to go and install the .NET Core 2 SDK in your computer. Once that is done, the .NET Core SDK gets installed. So let us check out where it gets installed. See program files, and there is something called as .NET. You can see here. So if you go to .NET, you can see that there is SDK, and you can see that at this moment we have two versions, major versions, 1.x and 2.x. Okay. So now that this SDK has been installed in my computer, I have created a simple folder here called as some project 123, and in this I want to go ahead and create a simple hello world console application using .NET Core, right? So let me fire up my command line cmd, right, and let me go and browse to that directory. So I'll go to the E drive, right. So now if you want to go and create a project using .NET Core, you need to type here .NET new project, new. What is it? Is it a console application? Is it a MVC application? What exactly you want to create? So I will say I want to go and create a simple console application, and I will press enter. Once you press enter, you can see that the commands will fire here. It will show what it is doing, and at the back end, you can see that he has created a simple Program.cs file. He has created a Visual Studio C# project, right? So if you see here, it's saying I have used the template console application, and it was created successfully. And also I have done .NET Restore. What does this .NET Restore do? This .NET Restore actually goes and in your OBJ, you can see that he has created some NuGet files. So if you remember, I said in .NET Core, NuGet is the mechanism to bring in the components in your project, right? So first thing, if you go here in this some project 123, you will find that there is a Visual Studio C# project. This is the same chproj file which you have been working till now. So in case you have been working with .NET, you know that this is the C# project file you have been working with, right? So this chproj file is nothing but it's an XML file. So if you open this in Notepad, in this you can see that there is one entry here saying that the target framework in which you will do the development is .NET Core 2.0, right? So that's one, and this one is the Program.cs file, wherein you have the static void main, you have the console.writeline, and so on. Now in case you are completely new to C# and you do not understand these words like class and namespace and static and so on, what I would suggest is please go and see the Learn C# in 100-hour video series, where I've explained all these concepts in detail, right? So there I have used .NET Framework, but remember the coding of .NET Framework and .NET Core is almost same, so you don't have to worry about it. So in case you are not understanding this using statement, this class and the static void main and this arguments and so on, please go and see this video series where we have explained in more detail about how to go about it. But in this video series, I will be targeting more on .NET Core and not on basic concepts. So the first command we learned here is .NET new console, right? Now if I want to go and build this, right, when I say build means what, I want that this should be packaged into a single DLL and so that I can ship it to production, right? So for that we have a command here, .NET build. So in the same folder I will just type .NET build and it will actually go and build my .NET program. It will take all the necessary DLLs via NuGet and it will actually put it in my bin folder. So you can see in my bin folder he has put all the DLLs, he has compiled it, and he has made this some project 123.dll. So that I can go to production and I can run this. And if you want to go and run the .NET program, you have to say here .NET run. So once you do a .NET run, you can see that the simple hello world text has been seen here, right? Now definitely, this is just for understanding purpose. In real big projects, where you have hundreds of files and so many things, right? It is not possible by using command line to say .NET new and then .NET build and .NET run. So these command lines here, which I'm explaining, is just to make you understand that how .NET Core works at the back end. Now on this top of it, we definitely need to go and use some tools like VS Code or Visual Studio. So this Visual Studio or VS Code or whatever tool you like, right, will actually go and fire these commands onto your project and help you to do development in an easier way. So this small lesson out here is just to make you understand that how .NET Core is there internally, how it has NuGet, how it has command line and so on. So the development of .NET Core is done in such a way that it is tool agnostic. So in other words, you can have any kind of tool like Eclipse, or you can have VS Code or Visual Studio. If you can configure the commands properly with your .NET SDK, then you are ready for development. Good. So this was a basic understanding of how .NET Core is, what is the SDK, and what are the commands. In the same way, let us also see that how we can create an MVC application. So let me go and delete all the files in this sum project 1 to 3. So let me go and delete this. So again, to create an MVC application, we need to go and fire the commands. So let me type CLS here. So again, at this moment, I'm doing it through command line. We will see how to do using Visual Studio. .NET new MVC, and I will press enter. So .NET new console application, .NET new MVC, right? And you can see at the back end, he has created controllers, models, views, your WW root, your Startup.cs, and a lot of things, right? We will go to internal of all of this, but the point I'm trying to make here is that how .NET Core creates applications at the backend, right? So if I want to run this, I'll say .NET run. Now you can see here the running is exactly same. Either you are running console application or either you are running MVC application. You have to always type .NET run. So you can see .NET run is running. So you can see that there my server is now running. So you can see that the server is running on localhost 5000 port. So let me go and copy here. Let me go to my browser here and let me see that what I see. So if I run here, I should see my first .NET Core MVC application running. So you can see that it is running my first .NET Core MVC application. So remember that either you want to create console application, either you want to create an MVC application, the process is almost same. .NET new and the type of application, .NET build and .NET run. But now when it comes to delivering professional projects, you can use a command line. You need some kind of a tool, you need some kind of an editor, you need some kind of an IDE, an integrated development environment, right? So for that, I'm going to go and use Visual Studio 2017. So you can see here I have installed Visual Studio 2017 and this is actually update 3. So this is Visual Studio 2017 Community Edition. It is free. You can go to the Microsoft site and you can download this setup. And it is version 15.3.3. That means that this is update 3. Okay. So I have Visual Studio 2017 here. So now let us go and create a project and let us see that how can we create a .NET Core project using Visual Studio 2017. Remember, over there we were firing the command .NET new console, .NET new MVC, while here we have a nice menu. So I can go and I can click on this and I can go and say I want to create a console application. Internally this definitely goes and fires .NET new core, or .NET new console, or .NET new MVC, right? But it is much easier as compared to typing on the console application. So I will go and say here, this is .NET Core console, and it will create the same kind of a files, same kind of a project. It will follow the same kind of mechanism of doing the NuGet, bringing in things and so on. So there my project is getting created. So you can see that there our project is created. So if you go to the folder, so you can see that I have right click on the project and I'm saying open folder in File Explorer, and you can see that I see the same kind of setup. I see that there is a Program.cs CS file, there is a CS proj file, there are folders which has the .NET Core app 2.0, right? Now if you go and hit the build button, so if I click on build here, this is like firing the .NET build command from console application, from the console command. So if I go and say build solution here, then my expectation is it should actually go and create one single DLL as we had done previously, right? So if I go and check here, you should see here those builds have been generated. So definitely, when we are talking about and in the same way, if I run this, right, it is like saying .NET run. Okay, so when I go and try to run this application using Visual Studio, when I click on this, it will internally fire .NET run. So whatever you are doing from the command line, the same things are happening internally, but at this moment, this is much better as compared to typing the commands. You are actually working through Visual Studio. So this console application is of .NET Core. In the same way, this console application is of this. So this console application is of .NET Framework. You can see this is .NET Core, and you can see that this is .NET Framework, right? So this is .NET Framework console app, right? So I would like to just put both of the projects side by side, so you can see that we have a solution and one solution has multiple projects. So it's taking time. So there you can see that this is .NET Core Console Framework, and this is .NET Core this is .NET Core Console Framework, this is .NET Core Console. So basically this one is using the .NET Framework and this one is using .NET Core. Also, some of the things you can see here, you can see that in the normal .NET Framework, this is a hammer sign, right? Why a hammer sign? Because all the DLLs here come from GAC. Remember I said in .NET Framework, the complete framework gets installed in your computer. So for example, if you go to system.data out here, and if you see the properties here, you will find that everybody at this moment is in this folder here, C program files and whatever it is, right? While this guy, you can see the icons are a bit different, here you can see it's actually a mix here. You can see that if you look at .NET Core, it has some mixed of GAC and it has some mixed of NuGet. So you can see these small buttons out here are saying that it is NuGet, while these hammers here are saying that it is taking from the GAC, right? So .NET Core basically downloads things using NuGet, while .NET Framework uses GAC. Okay, great. So in the same solution, I have different kind of framework versions in my project which I'm using. And now with all these things, there is one thing which is coming up very badly, and that is inconsistency between these .NET Framework families. So if you see now at this moment, we have almost 8 to 9 families of .NET Framework. So first one is this main one, .NET Framework, which is launched in 2002, stable one. Almost 90% people are using this framework. But at the same time, when this framework was launched and it was coming out with new versions, parallelly there were other frameworks which were launched, other families of frameworks which were targeted to cross-platform, targeted for browser and so on. So one was Mono, on which at this moment Xamarin is running. Then we have Silverlight, wherein we had a downsized framework of .NET framework. And then we have now .NET Core, which I recently discussed, which is cross-platform. Then we have .NET Compact, and then there was .NET for Universal Windows and so on. So basically, we have now lot of .NET framework families. Now let us say that if I want to go and share some common code base, if I want to say that, okay, I want to share a common code base which can be used in Mono, it can be used in .NET framework, it can be used in .NET Core. So what should I do for it? So for that, Microsoft have given something called as the PCL, that is Portable Class Library. So I can go and create a portable class library. And in this portable class library, he says that, okay, tell me that this shared code, you want to use it in which platforms, which flavors of .NET framework. So you can go and select here. I want to select these .NET frameworks, and I want to target this PCL for these targets, right? So when I press OK, he actually gives me a nice way of creating class libraries, and these class libraries will work for all the selected frameworks for which you have created the class library. Now this solution was okay, but one of the problem with this solution was the dialog box itself. So this dialog box, what you saw at this moment, this dialog box is a problem, because let us say that if a new .NET framework family comes in, then they have to give me one more option here, one more checkbox, and I have to go and recompile my project for that new family, right? So that is one problem. And the second problem was creating NuGet packages. So one is that, okay, you can go and you can create an PCL and you can target your frameworks, right? But these PCL, if I go and unload the project, these PCL had something called as profile. So you can see that when you create any PCL, there is something called as a profile. So what exactly is this profile? This profile here says that which .NET families or which .NET framework families is this code targeted towards. You can see that you can see on the screen there is number of profiles here. Profile 5 means that your code is compatible with .NET Framework 4.0 and Windows 8. So if you say profile 47, so let us go and search for profile 47. So if I go and say 47 here, so 47 says that your code is targeted towards .NET Framework 4.5, Silverlight 5 and Windows 8. But now this is problematic, because you can see that over here on the screen we are having a lot of profiles, 344 profiles. It is like the permutation and combination of all the framework families. So when you actually try to create a NuGet package, you need to really know that which profile you are targeting. So basically packaging a NuGet for PCL was really painful. So that's where .NET standards came into picture. .NET standard goes the other way around. If you look at the problem with PCL, in PCL says that the PCL approach says that, okay, go ahead, create a new family and they can just go ahead and create their own APIs, right? While .NET standard says that, okay, here is a standard. It is more like centralization. So it says that here is a standard like .NET 1. So if you're following .NET standard 1, that means you are satisfying 4.5, you are satisfying Mono 4.6, you are satisfying iOS and so on. So if you are on 2.0, that means that you are not supporting Windows Phone, right? So you are supporting other kind of framework. So the .NET standard is nothing but it is a specification of APIs which says that if this standard is followed, then which frameworks you can target. So .NET standard brings centralization as compared to PCL, where every framework was working with its own whims and wishes. So if you see in Visual Studio 2017, we have here, where we can go and we can create a .NET standard DLL. So you can see this is a .NET standard class library. And when I create this class library, I need to say that which .NET standard I am targeting towards. And depending on which .NET standard I target towards, I will be satisfying those APIs or those framework families, right? So you can see that I have created a class library of .NET standard. And here you can see that it is saying this is .NET standard 1.1. So if I go and write code over here in this .NET standard 1.1, so 1.1 means it is going to go and satisfy these things. You can see 1.1 will work for .NET Core, it will work for .NET Framework, it will work for Xamarin Android, Mono, right? But if I code using 2.0, then Windows Phone and Silverlight won't work. So .NET Standard is nothing but it is a specification, and if you follow that specification, you are targeting X types of .NET Framework families, right? Great. So that brings us to the end of this video. So in this video, we were trying to understand what is .NET Core, what is the architectural difference between .NET Core and .NET Framework. Then we also saw what are .NET standards. We also created a simple .NET Core application using the command line SDK, and we tried to do some hands-on on .NET commands like .NET new console and then .NET build and .NET run. And also what we did in this lab is we also created a simple MVC core application and we ran it, right? And we also saw that how we can go and create .NET Core application using Visual Studio 2017. So now that we are having an understanding of .NET Core, now the next lab is all about MVC Core. So now that we know the main platform, right, on which MVC Core will stand, how it is working, now let us go ahead and start with MVC Core. So the next tutorial is on MVC Core.
So welcome to lab 2, and in lab 2 we will be doing these concepts here. So this lab 2 is going to be approximately a 25 minutes of video. So in this, first we will try to understand the MVC architecture. We will create a simple MVC project and we will try to understand the folders and files inside the MVC project. So we'll go through what is Program.cs, what is the Startup.cs, what are app settings, and we will also see how to read configuration data using MVC Core. And in MVC Core, the web servers are slightly different configured. So here we have something called as a Kestrel web server. So we'll try to understand that how does Kestrel web server works with IIS using the reverse proxy concept, and how does the web servers and how are the web servers configured in MVC Core. We'll also go through some important methods like configuration and configuration services. And while we are doing this whole demo, we will try to understand the full flow of how MVC applications actually start up. So when you initially start an MVC application, when you load an MVC application in the web server, what are the various events and various stages does this MVC startup process go through? So let us look into this 25 minutes of video and let us try to cover these points.
Now, before we go ahead and we create a project and before we go ahead and do some practicals, let us first try to understand that how does this MVC architecture work? What are the various sections in this MVC architecture? So if you look at the MVC architecture, primarily there are three important units in MVC. The first one is the controller. So the C stands for the controller, the M stands for the model, and the V stands for the view. So now what happens? Now, when an end user comes to your website, he tries to do some kind of an action. For example, whenever end user comes to a website, he will try to do some kind of an action. He will try to do a login. He will try to do a logout. He will try to place an order. He will try to add, update, delete. He will do certain kind of actions on your website. So these actions or these requests is first sent to the controller. So the controller is the first person, who actually gets that request, and controller then, depending on that request, he will go and create an object of the respective model. For example, if you say login, he will go to the model directory and he will try to create an object of the login class, right? So, he will go and he will create the object of the login class or the respective model and then interact with the model, right? Try to fulfill that action. And then finally, he will take that data or he will take whatever it is, and he will go and he will patch up that data to the view. And then that view is rendered onto your browser. So you can think about this controller class out here, or this controller thing out here interacts between the view and the model. It is kind of this is kind of a binding layer between the view and the model. While the model has the business logic. So if you say you have an order class, the order class will have order number. It will have, the amount and the product and so on. So all those validations will be done in this model. So the controller will first interact with the model, do the validation, fetch data, and take this model and pass it to the view. And the view will have the look and feel. So the view will say, okay, place it here, place it on the left hand side, make it bold, green or whatever, right? He will take that object, patch it to the view and then send it to the browser. So all of these three units, they do their respective work. So the controller does the binding work, the model has the business logic, and the view has the look and feel and positioning. So now that we have the basic understanding of the MVC architecture, let us go ahead and create a simple MVC project and let us try to understand the MVC project structure, right? Now, if you remember in the previous part of the video when I was explaining .NET Core, I showed you how to create an MVC project by using the .NET CLI. So I went to the command prompt and I had typed .NET new MVC, right? But definitely, when you're working with professional projects, you won't be using a command line. You would need some kind of an IDE, some kind of a tool, some kind of an editor, which can expedite your process, right? So for now, for this Learn MVC Core tutorial, I'll be using the Visual Studio 2017. I'm going to use the Visual Studio 2017 Community Edition. Remember that Visual Studio Community Edition is a free Visual Studio IDE which you can use to create web, mobile and desktop applications. So it's an absolutely free tool. So you can see over here, that this is Visual Studio Community 2017 and this is the version number. Now, whatever demo I'm showing here is also valid for the further coming Visual Studio versions as well. So in case, if you are on 2018, you can still follow this tutorial, right? So I have this thing installed here. So I will go to File. I will say New Project. And so there it is. It is initializing the templates, right? So, and we'll be using C# as a primary language. Remember that when you talk about .NET, you can also use Visual Basic. You can use other things, but we'll be using Visual C#. So I'm saying Visual C# and web, and there it is. So you can see now there are two templates in the web. One is the ASP.NET Core and the other one is the ASP.NET Web Application. Now this ASP.NET Core is built using .NET Core, while this ASP.NET Web is built using .NET Framework. You can see this word here, .NET Framework. So this is built using .NET Core. This is built using .NET Framework, which implies that if you go and create a project using .NET Framework, this will only run inside Windows. And if you use this, you will be actually running cross-platform. So you can see at the right-hand side, it says project templates for creating applications for Windows, Linux, and Mac. But when I click on this, it says project, it does not say anything actually, but this is only for Windows. Now, in case you want to learn this thing, that means the .NET Framework MVC 5, right? Then I would suggest to go and watch our Learn MVC 5 videos, Learn MVC 5 in 16 hours video section, where we have explained the MVC 5 .NET Framework step by step, by creating a project. But if you're saying MVC Core, which we are doing now, we are going to go and select this template. So let us select this template and let us name here as Customer Application. So as I've said that in this tutorial, I will be creating a small project as well. So what we will do is we will create a simple customer application which will have a customer code, it will have a customer name, it will have a customer amount, right? So a simple screen with 3 text boxes, right? And then we will create some add, update, delete and such kind of a functionality. So that's why I've selected this, right? And I've selected customer application, and you can see in the drop down it says .NET Framework 4.6, but do not worry too much about it because the current Visual Studio is heavily tied up with the old framework, right? So that's why some of these things do not resonate, with what we have selected here, but don't worry. So this is .NET Core at this moment. So customer application, and I'll say okay. It then pops up again one more box here saying that, okay, so you want to create a web application using .NET Core, right? And then he gives you more flavors of framework saying that till what depth you want, or what is the kind of project nature. For example,
Do you want to just create a basic empty project? Do you want to create a web API? So we'll talk about all these flavors. At this moment, what I would suggest is go and select this template, because this template will have all the basic code what we need to create a proper MVC application, right? So you can see here that if you want to create an Angular with MVC, right, or React with MVC, so there are other templates as well. But I would suggest to go and select this, and later on, if you wish, we will add Angular, we will add React to it, right? So I've selected Web Application Model View Controller. I'm just ensuring that I'm using ASP.NET Core 2.0, and now there are various authentication modes for ASP.NET Core, right? So at this moment, I'm just selecting no authentication, because later on what we'll do is we'll manually try to add these other authentications. So these authentication we will take in the later part of the class, don't worry. So I've selected web application. I have said change authentication to no authentication, and let me say okay. So there it is now creating the project, and let us see what it creates. So you can see that there our project is created. So you can see that there is a solution. Inside solution we have project, and inside the project we have some folders and files. Now you can see there are a lot of folders, there are a lot of files out here, but let us start slowly and let us start from the important sections. So first three important sections are models, views, and controllers. In these three sections, we put those respective code of those sections. For example, if you want to add a controller, you will add here. If you want to add a UI, you will add into the views folder. So these three folders are where you will spend 90% of your time coding, analyzing things, and so on. Then we have something here called as a www root folder. In the www root folder, you will put things which are static in nature. For example, CSS, images, pure HTML files, JavaScript files, icons, and so on, right? So all those static kind of things, which we need in our website, you will actually put in your www root. You can also see that we have something called as a Startup.cs file. This Startup.cs file is where you will put the initial configurations and initialization of how your website will be configured. For example, when your website starts, you would like to say that, okay, in this website, I am putting the authorization in this way. I'm putting my authentication in this way. For logging, I will be using that, right? Or this. So basically the initial configurations, what you need for your website, you will all put it over here in the Startup.cs file. So we'll discuss about the Startup.cs file in more details later on. The next file, which is very important in this project, is the AppSettings.json. Now, normally when you talk about applications, especially web application, it needs a lot of parameters. For example, it needs connection strings, it needs a lot of other things, right? So those all parameters and configurations which you need in your project, you'll be putting it out here. In your old ASP.NET, this guy was nothing but your web.config file. So if you remember your web.config file where you were putting all the configuration, so in MVC Core, it is appsettings.json. Also, you can see in your application, we have something called as Program.cs file. Now, normally Program.cs file, especially when you're talking about .NET applications, they are available in Windows and console application. So in web application, normally in your old projects, you won't have seen Program.cs file. But this Program.cs file is the first thing which runs in the MVC Core application, and it actually starts the web server. So your IIS server, and there is again something called as a Kestrel server. Both of those guys actually get initiated from here. So we'll talk about more about this Program.cs file later on. But for now, you can remember that the Program.cs file is the first file which runs, and this file actually invokes the web servers, right? So very quickly revising, what are the different entities in your MVC Core? www root for static content, controllers, models, and views to add the controller, model, and the view code, appsettings.json for configuration, Program.cs file starts your web server, and Startup.cs file loads your configuration. It provides things which your website should need, and so on, right? You can also see that there are two more files here, bower.json and bundleconfig.json. For now, leave these files at this moment. We will talk about these files as we go ahead. Remember that do not try to learn everything in one go. Try to go slow, try to learn minimal, and try to digest them first. So both of these guys I will talk later on. If you wish, you can go and delete this file bower.json. You really don't need it. You can just delete it. It's okay. Nothing will get affected. Keep the bundle config for now, right? So leave this file for now. Most of the time you would be working with www controllers, models, and views. These are the three things, where you will be spending most of your time. Now, when any website starts, it actually goes through two different states. The first state is, where the server is starting. It is loading the configuration. It is loading the cache. It is making things ready so that it can serve the end request of the end user, right? And once the server starts and it loads, right, after that, the server starts serving the request of the end user. So basically, if you try to break up the phases of any website, it has two phases. The first is, where the web server starts, loads the application, loads all the services, loads the cache, loads configuration. And the second phase is where it actually starts serving the request. So let us try to zoom in on the first phase and let us try to understand that which are the different files and things, which gets invoked in MVC core to start up a MVC core web server, right? So the first file which runs is the program.cs file. Now let me make a statement here. If you see really the ASP.NET MVC core application is a console application, means basically it starts from program.cs and it first runs the web server. And if you look at this web server, what they have done in MVC core is they knew that IIS runs only on Windows. And when you say that MVC core has to run cross-platform, then you need to replace this IIS with some cross-platform web server. So what they have done is when actually this code runs build web host and run, inside this code, they actually start up a small mini server called as a Kestrel web server. This Kestrel web server is a cross-platform server, through which all the requests comes to the ASP.NET MVC core application. So if you look at this program.cs, what it does is it does two things. It actually starts up the Kestrel web server and then it goes and it invokes this startup.cs file. And in the startup.cs file, we load all the configurations. Now, one of the questions which can come to your mind is, so if Kestrel web server is running, so does it mean that our IIS web server is off? Or does it mean that I cannot use an Apache web server or some other server? You can use it. What you can do is you can make IIS and other strong servers as a reverse proxy. Reverse proxy means, when the end user sends a request, it will first come to the IIS web server or to a Apache server or something. And from there, he will send the request to Kestrel web server and Kestrel web server will respond back and give it back to the IIS and IIS will forward it to the browser. So basically, what Kestrel web server says is that you can always have your strong web server which will do authentication, which will do authorization, which is actually like a 10-15 years old web server which you want to exploit, right? You want to still use that. So what you can do is you can make it as a front-end server and let all the requests come to that server first, and then it can send that request to Kestrel and Kestrel can serve request, as per ASP.NET MVC core nature, right? So mostly if you see when applications of MVC core will be hosted, on the front end, you will have some kind of a strong mature web server like IIS who will act as a reverse proxy. From that, the request will go to Kestrel web server and Kestrel web server will process the MVC core request and send back the response to the IIS and IIS will send it back to the browser. Now, once the web server has started, the program.cs file then goes and invokes the startup.cs file. Now, the startup.cs file does primarily two things. One is that it goes and it loads the configuration, and second is it loads the services. So again, I repeat, the startup.cs file does two important things. One is it loads the configurations. Configurations, if you remember, in the previous part of the video, I had said that configurations are all stored into AppSettings.json file. This AppSettings.json file is the same file, in your old MVC and old ASP.NET web form, it was termed as web config file. So all your configurations which are here, the startup.cs file loads those configuration into this iConfiguration object out here. So one is that it loads the configuration and another one is it loads the services. So basically, if you look at the startup.cs file, when it invokes, it goes through three different sections. First is there is a constructor which runs. Second is there is something called as a configure services which runs, and then third is a configure, right? So basically it goes through three different sections. One is it first starts with a constructor, then it calls configure services, and then it calls configure. So in the constructor, you can see that it goes and it loads this configuration using dependency injection. So you can see inside this configuration, it actually goes and reads all the configuration from here, and it sends you through this constructor through dependency injection. In case you are new to dependency injection, I would suggest to go and watch this video, where I have explained dependency injection and inversion control in more detail. But at this moment, you can just remember, in case you have not seen that video, you can just think about it, that the MVC core framework will go and inject this configuration object loaded with all the values inside this AppSettings.json file. So for example, now normally when you say configurations, you can have configurations like this. You can have some kind of a parameter, like, you can say, okay, this is parameter 1, and this parameter 1 has a value like value 1, let us say. Okay. Then you can have complex kind of parameters. For example, I can say, okay, I have a connection string, but this connection string, I'll just say const string, and this connection string is of two types. One is that I have, for the prod environment, for production environment, I have some connection string here. So I'll say this is the prod database, right? And also for the development environment, I have something like a dev DB. So normally, in this AppSettings.json file, you can have a single valued parameter if you wish, or you can have a complex type of parameter, like one parameter inside again other parameter, right? So if you see here, if I go and put a debug point here, and if I try to run this application, so you can see here that I have put a debug point and I'm running the application. So what MVC core will do is it will read everything, what I have placed inside this AppSettings.json, and it will inject that object over here. So you can see here now the configuration object is loaded. So what I can do is I can do something like this. So you can see here, so I can go and I can go to quick watch. So now you can see here, now let us say I want to go and get parameter 1. So I can just go and say here, this is parameter 1, right? So you can see that is value 1. Now in case I want to get the connection string, so I have to say here, okay, const string, and which value do you want? Do you want the prod one or do you want the development one? So I'll say prod. So you can see that is prod DB. And if I type here dev, that is dev DB. So basically, the configurations are all loaded in the constructor of the Startup.cs file. So remember, first thing what runs is the console application, the Program.cs file. It goes and it runs your Kestrel web server. It runs your IIS as a proxy. And after that, it goes and it invokes the Startup.cs file. And in the Startup.cs file, the first thing what runs is the constructor. And in the constructor, all the configurations are loaded from the AppSettings.json. And after that, there are two other methods which runs, which is configure services and configure. Now, every website or every web application are of different nature. Some of the web application use X services, and then some of them use X+1 services, and then some of them use X+100 services, right? So we would like to go and pick and choose these services so that we can have a very lower memory footprint, when our requests get executed. So what they have done in MVC is, they have created a kind of a plug and play model. Again, I repeat, in MVC core, they have created a plug and play model where you can say that, okay, what do you want? You want just MVC, or you want just static pages? So you can go and configure these services in two methods. So there is something called as configure services, and there is something called as configure. So in the Startup.cs file, both of these methods execute one after another. So first the configure services execute, and then the configure executes. So in configure services, you can go and you can add the service, and in configure, you will go and you will configure the service. So for example, you can see over here in the configure services, I'm saying add MVC, and then in the configure method, I'm saying configure the MVC with these routes. So these two methods help you to define which services you want to use and how you want to configure them. So basically, you can have a website, where you do not have MVC or .NET Core at all. You just use the static pages. And then you have another kind of website, where you say, okay, I want MVC plus static pages. Or must be, sometimes you will say, okay, I want MVC plus static pages plus entity framework and database and so on. So in MVC core, you can pick and choose your services. You can configure them by using both of these methods. You can also, one of the important thing here is you can see here, like I have add MVC in the configure services, and then I have use MVC in the configure method. So add MVC will add the MVC service, while use MVC will configure it. Now there are some services like example use browser link and use static files. For this we do not have an add method, means you do not have here like services.add.html. Why? Because the configurations of HTML and the browser links are very simple. So for the simple things, you can just go and start using them. You don't have to really configure them. Okay. So in configure services, you add the service, and in configure, you configure the services, right? So if you look at the whole flow, the first thing what runs is the program.cs file. After that, what runs is the startup, the constructor. After that, configure services, and then the configure, where you go and you configure the services. So if you look at the basic startup of a MVC core web application, it goes something like this. So first thing, it comes to the console application, to the program.cs, and the program.cs goes and invokes the Kestrel web server, right? And makes the IIS as a front-end proxy. After that, you can see the startup starts. In the constructor, first thing, the whole configuration is loaded from the app settings.json file. After that, configure services run, and in configure services, we add the services which we want, and in configure, we go and we configure the service. So for example, in the configure, I had added MVC, while in configure, I have used MVC, right? So once this whole startup is done, then your MVC application starts, and then you can see your MVC website. So there it is. You can see that they have created some basic site here with home and about, and now that has started. So this was a very quick understanding of what happens, when an MVC core application actually starts. What are the different participants, which actually participate, and where you can go and do the configurations. Now in the next video, we will talk about how does MVC work, once the website has started and an end user sends a request, how does the request work? And also in the next lesson, we will talk about something called as the MVC middleware. So if you want to build a pipeline, you can use the middleware. So the next video is on how the MVC framework actually works, how a request works when an end user sends a request to MVC. And second, we'll talk about what exactly are middlewares and how to go and configure them.